So you can probably tell this video is going to be a bit different from the videos I normally make. It's not made to demonize the ARMY, but rather to point out aspects of it that lead to it being seen as so toxic. I'm going to be going through a list of 9 factors that I think lead to this perception. Notice that this video isn't called Why the ARMY is a Terrible Toxic Fandom, but rather why it seems toxic. There are many cases where I'm going to come to the ARMY's defense, and some where I won't. I don't want to sugarcoat anything. I want this to be an honest, reasonable, and calm discussion. Recently, Stan Twitter has been buzzing because of a recent Sunmi interview. If you're living under a rock and don't know about this, essentially an interviewer mentioned that artists like Wonder Girls laid the groundwork for K-pop internationally, and her response was no, BTS. Ever since, fans have been yelling at each other, with critics being accused of calling Sunmi dumb for saying she didn't understand the term, and the ARMY being accused of not acknowledging the artists who laid the groundwork for BTS. This new controversy sparked new discussion about the ARMY being toxic, and it made me think more about it and want to dive into the topic. Is the ARMY actually toxic? And if so, why? Up front, I want to let y'all know where I'm coming from. I'm multi-fandom, meaning that I stan multiple groups, and BTS is one of them. My bias is June, my bias wreckers are Yoongi and Tae, Blood, Sweat, and Tears is still superior, and Outro Her is an underrated masterpiece. However, I don't call myself an ARMY, partially because of what we're about to talk about, but mostly because I generally only call myself a My Day, Agase, and In Spirit, since Day 6, GOT7, and Infinite are my alt groups. Also, I am not coming for every single member of the ARMY. I'll repeat this many times throughout the video, but I want to make it clear from the start. Many members of the fandom are lovely. Keep doing your thing, support BTS, I'm happy for you. If at any point you feel very attacked by what I'm saying, maybe it's time to take a deep breath and really reevaluate what you're doing and saying and the way you support your faves. Number 1, the ARMY is just bigger. The first one is the most simple, and it's also the basis of many of my other points, so listen up. Every single fandom has problematic members. They don't make up the majority of any fandom, but there's logically no way for any fandom to be completely devoid of toxic members. So, if this is the case, why is the ARMY called out more for this than other fandoms? The answer is in the numbers. The ARMY is the biggest K-pop fandom, so inevitably they're going to have the highest number of toxic members. Here's a quick example. The numbers and statistics used here aren't real. They're simply used to make my point in more tangible terms. Let's say that 1% of K-pop fans are toxic fans, and there are 10 million fans in the ARMY and 5 million fans in Fandom A. If 1% of K-pop fans are toxic, purely based on statistics, the ARMY would have 100,000 toxic members versus Fandom A's 50,000 toxic members. That's double the number of toxic members simply due to the fandom being double the size. In real life, that percentage might not be the same across all fandoms, but even when everything is equal, the ARMY ends up with more toxic members despite the percentage being the same. A lot of the problem, but not all, simply boils down to this one fact. There are a lot of great members of the ARMY, but the loud, toxic minority is still a massive number of people in such a huge fandom. So that example is if the percentages were equal across the board, if every fandom was 99% positivity and 1% toxic. The next few points give reasons why the percentage might not realistically be the same across every fandom and might actually be higher in the ARMY. The fandom's demographics. Point number 2, the ARMY is the gateway fandom. Since BTS is the most recognizable K-pop group to Western audiences who are just discovering K-pop, they're a gateway to K-pop for many people. They attract the most new K-pop fans, the most casual K-pop fans, and the most single fandom stans. These demographics have some of the highest likelihood of bringing in toxicity to a fandom. Many members of the ARMY eventually become entrenched in the world of K-pop and get into other groups, but many others don't. And these are the types of fans who are most likely to discredit other groups. Obviously, many of them are not like this, but you're much more likely to see a single fandom stan engaging in fan wars than multi-stans. And again, based just on the size of the fandom, the largest percentage of single fandom stans are BTS stans, and we'll return to this in a bit. When people discover more groups than just their gateway into K-pop, they realize that every group is talented and has something unique about them. It humanizes other groups rather than just seeing them as competition. That doesn't mean you have to love all of them, but there's more of a respect for other groups' talents when you know more about the genre. But a lot of casual and new fans haven't developed that baseline respect yet. Point number 3, the influx of new young fans. People of every demographic enjoy K-pop all around the globe, which is really amazing, and the same is true for the ARMY. However, there are a few factors specific to the ARMY that lead to them having a lot of very young fans. Firstly, their popularity. Being the most popular K-pop group, they're automatically going to have a very young fan base. Why? Because that's how marketing and popularity works in the US. Over the past couple years, BTS has absolutely exploded into bigger and bigger international popularity, and a huge chunk of that is the US. And the US loves stereotypes. The American media has pigeonholed them as a tween thing, which means that BTS gets put in tween magazines and shoved in the faces of tweens everywhere, which in turn does actually bring a lot more young fans into the fandom. Like other new fans, these young fans also don't have that base knowledge of K-pop before getting into BTS. But Chris, I hear you saying, you've gone on a tangent about the age of fans. What does that have to do with the fandom being toxic? Let me make it clear, I'm not coming for all tweens. There are many who are mature and not toxic at all, and there's nothing wrong with BTS having a young fan base. If anything, I think it's really positive for K-pop overall that BTS is being shown to young people. It makes K-pop more normalized and accepted. However, the teen demographic has one of the highest likelihoods of being blunt and non-empathetic, looking down on people who don't love their faves. As people grow up, their ability to accept that other people have differing opinions continues to develop. As much as we all hated to admit it as tweens and teenagers, there's a reason you're still considered a kid until age 18 in many places. It's because you're still developing mentally and physically. We all felt like we should be considered adults when we were teens because we didn't realize that there was some important fine-tuning that was still developing. On top of this, tweens are generally the most outspoken, devoted fans. Yes, the whole teeny bopper craze is a stereotype, and it's flat out rude to tweens and teenagers. It's often exaggerated, and when you're part of the fandom, it feels like the media trivializes your faves and looks down on them. And while a lot of this is exaggerated and blown out of proportion, it does have some basis in reality. We saw it back in the 50s and 60s with the Beatles and Elvis. It goes all the way back to a 19th century composer named Franz Liszt. The term Listomania was coined to describe his fans. It was actual hysteria, also referred to as Liszt fever. So it's a stereotype, yes, but one that does have a basis in reality and has repeated itself over and over throughout history. People in this demographic are legitimately more prone to idolize K-pop stars. I mean, it's in the name, they're K-pop idols. Combine this idolization with the fine-tuning of being accepting of other people's points of view, that can lead to this specific demographic being another that has a high likelihood of engaging in fan wars and toxicity. And like I said at the beginning of this point, the number of young fans in the ARMY has exploded over the past couple of years. Point number 4, because of a newer, younger, more casual fandom, they aren't always aware of acts who came before and are therefore quicker to discredit them. New fans, young fans, casual fans, and a combination of the three. What do they have in common? They don't have a vast knowledge of K-pop history. Sure, there are people who discover K-pop and dive head first, learning the history of the genre and immersing themselves in the culture immediately, but think back to your own K-pop journey. Most of us take a while to learn about the current groups, the past groups, and the history that got us to where we are now. And when someone doesn't know the history, they're more likely to discredit artists who came before the current ones simply because they don't know about them. They may not mean to discredit them, but they may not know about certain things like Wonder Girls touring with the Jonas Brothers or Girls' Generation performing on American talk shows in 2012. These were things that I didn't learn until well into my K-pop fandom, and there are probably a lot of other fans who don't realize that there were actually a lot of groups whose moderate success in the States laid the groundwork for what BTS is now able to do. It's easy for fans who weren't around at the time to not realize how big of a deal it was then and how much these groups truly did to lay the groundwork for BTS and the groups that BTS is currently laying the groundwork for. Yes, this gets back a bit to the Sunmi discussion. Laying the groundwork is a vague term that has several interpretations. And for a lot of people, laying the groundwork includes the things that earlier generations did so that BTS could in turn lay the groundwork for artists following them. First generation laid the groundwork for the second generation for the third generation, and so forth. And BTS is integral to the current groundwork being laid for artists to come. They've all made an impact and they all deserve credit for it. But many members of the ARMY have made BTS laid the groundwork or no BTS their only response to any discussion on the topic, repeating the same two phrases ad nauseum rather than having an actual discussion. That helps no one, and in simply repeating them, it does discredit earlier artists because they're ignoring people who don't share their opinion. I've also seen people say, imagine thinking that a fan knows better than an actual idol. But there's something to be said about Sunmi simply being modest. And also, it was literally 2 words. That whole mess over 2 words. I've already talked about this too long. This video isn't about the no BTS controversy, and the entire K-pop fandom has already spun its wheels enough arguing about it, so I'll move on. Number 5, the ARMY is simply in the spotlight the most. This is a simple one, and it's one where I will defend the ARMY. BTS is in the spotlight the most, meaning that the ARMY is in the spotlight the most. Any controversy the ARMY gets into is going to be something everyone knows about. Every fandom has fan wars, some have more than others, and the ARMY certainly has a lot, partially due to how big the fandom is. But couple that with the fact that there's a big spotlight pointed directly at the drama, and every controversy becomes public knowledge. When smaller fandoms have drama, you might never know about it unless you're in the fandom, but ARMY fan wars can be a big enough deal that they get covered by K-pop news sites. And of course, when controversy strikes, the ARMY is immediately going to rush to the defense of both themselves and BTS. And while the majority of the fandom does so with a level head, when the fandom has such a large number of young, casual, and new fans that we've already discussed, the likelihood of toxic arguments and statements increases. Number 6, the K-pop fandom as a whole has failed the ARMY. Think about some of the things I've mentioned so far. Fan wars, stan culture, single fandom versus multi-fandom. The K-pop fandom at large is built for feuds. Fan wars are literally woven into our vocabulary. There's an unwritten subtext, especially when you're first dipping your toes in, that fan wars are the norm, that fandoms argue a lot. And while many people don't buy into this narrative, there are many who do. And again, the demographic of fans most likely to buy into this: young fans, casual fans, new fans, and single fandom stans. And the group with the largest number of all of these is still the ARMY. Single group stans aren't inherently problematic. There are a ton of people who only stan one group and couldn't be bothered to criticize other groups. But, like I said earlier, single fandom stans are more likely to engage in fan wars. Why? Because single fandom stans from other fandoms do it, which in turn makes you feel the need to stand up for your own fandom. It's a self-perpetuating cycle. An XOL calls BTS trash, an ARMY calls EXO trash, and people who stan both groups go not again because it's name-calling simply for the sake of name-calling. The K-pop fandom is so focused around supporting your favorite group, and a lot of people take that to the extreme of trying to tear down other groups or look down on people who don't stan their favorite group. There's also a prevailing narrative within the K-pop fandom of people who think their opinion on music is the correct one. Screw the fact that it's an opinion, theirs is right. You didn't include this group in your list of favorite songs, you're canceled. This happens all the time. Anyone who shares their opinion about K-pop to a large enough number of people can attest to this. It's something that's extremely common in the K-pop community. So again, this one isn't entirely the ARMY's fault. They're a product of a larger culture, and they have the exact toxic concoction of people who are willing to buy into it hook, line, and sinker. Number 7, the ARMY's intensity annoys some people. This has been happening for years. One thing the K-pop fandom is known for is its intensity. And which fandom is the poster child for that? Again, the ARMY. They have a reputation of trying to make everything about them. Often it has to do with new stans or single fandom stans comparing everything to BTS. A lot of the time, it's just done out of enthusiasm. We all do it. OMG, this thing is just like this other thing I love. When you're so enthusiastic about something and love it so much, you want to talk about it all the time. And this leads to people who love BTS bringing them up at every opportunity because of how much they love them. But when outsiders constantly come across the ARMY comparing other idols and groups to BTS, they get annoyed, they complain, and the ARMY fires back. And because it's a fandom, members don't see it as just attacking them personally, but as attacking BTS as well. And as I've said many times throughout this video, this isn't just an ARMY thing, but the ARMY is the most prominent, and therefore the times they do this are much more visible. I've seen it happen time and time again, and it never makes the ARMY look good. They're just trying to enthuse over their faves and defend them, but it can turn antagonistic and toxic really quickly, and because they're such a large fandom, everyone sees it. Number 8, BTS is at the top of their game, giving the fandom an inflated ego. BTS has done it. They've broken down barriers, and that right there is a recipe for a fandom with an inflated ego, including some fans literally thinking BTS has actually transcended the genre and no longer belong in K-pop. that they're above it now. And I get it, your fave is thriving and you want to shout it to the world because you're proud of them. Again, we all love celebrating our bias group's successes, but that can quickly turn into a fandom with a massive ego who think they and their bias groups are better than everyone else. Again, as I've said like 1,000 times in this video, this isn't just an ARMY thing. Many K-pop fandoms have gone through an ego trip when their favorite group does something groundbreaking because it gives them a chance to one-up another fandom. And right now, the ARMY is the fandom on top. Again, there are plenty of members of the ARMY who have respect for other groups and who appreciate BTS as a group without tearing other groups or fandoms down. But the toxic minority is always so loud, pushing to the forefront and starting fan wars because their ego has gotten so inflated that they feel the need to tear down other fandoms. I think it's important to point out here that despite being the biggest K-pop group, BTS has avoided major scandals. Sure, there have been minor things here and there, but nearly every criticism lobbed at them is about their fandom. BTS worked to get where they are. They didn't debut as the international celebrities that they are today. They were once the little group clawing their way to the top while being torn down by bigger artists. And the irony is that now that they're successful and have a campaign all about love and acceptance, a toxic minority of their fandom tries to tear down other fandoms the way people tried to tear down BTS. And something that's often forgotten in this mess is that a lot of the groups that the vocal minority tries to tear down are friends of BTS. The groups are friends supporting each other while the fandoms scream at each other and try to drag each other down. And finally, number 9, BTS stans not wanting to be associated with the term ARMY. It's no secret after this whole long discussion that the ARMY has garnered a reputation whether they like it or not. And because of that, a lot of people who have a problem with that reputation decide that they don't want to be associated with the fandom anymore. I've seen so many people over the past week or so repeating, "Stan the group, not the fandom." And when so many of the non-toxic majority decide they don't want to be associated with the toxic minority and denounce the term ARMY, they skew the balance of the fandom perception again, giving more power to the toxic minority. And I don't blame them. I'm one of them. But it certainly doesn't help the overall perception of the fandom. But individuals need to make that decision for themselves. If you don't like the association, there's no requirement to associate. So those are the 9 factors that I think have led to the ARMY being perceived as the most toxic fandom. A lot of it is simply due to numbers. Some of it is due to the K-pop fandom as a whole, and some of it is in fact due to the ARMY itself. So, what's the point of this video apart from just analyzing the biggest fandom in K-pop? Really, I'm hoping that we can take a step back and recognize where we can each do better as K-pop stans. Because like I said earlier, the ARMY is also a product of the K-pop fandom as a whole. I don't want this to get preachy, so I'll just say be kind, be respectful, and listen to what BTS has said. Love yourself, follow their example.
And remember, if you can't love yourself, how in the hell are you gonna love somebody else?